Smash that subscribe button like the truth is trying to escape. Hit like if you're ready for something unsettling, and comment if you think you know where this is going. Because this story gets darker the more you listen. The courthouse steps were slick with rain the morning Emily Rourke arrived, flanked by two attorneys and a swarm of cameras. Reporters shouted questions over one another, their voices colliding in the gray air like sirens. Someone yelled, "Emily, why now?" Another voice cut through sharper. "Are you really suing your own parents?" Emily didn't answer. She kept her eyes forward, jaw tight, hands trembling just enough to be noticed. Above the courthouse doors, an American flag snapped violently in the wind, as if even it were trying to pull away. Inside, the case file carried a title that made even veteran clerks pause: Rourke versus Rourke. Plaintiff, Emily and Rourke, age 32. Defendants, Thomas and Margaret Rourke. Cause of action, wrongful life, emotional damages, fraud, and intentional concealment. Damages sought, undisclosed. But the whispers in the hall said the number didn't matter. The accusation did. Emily was suing the people who gave her life, for giving it to her at all. The case didn't begin in that courthouse. It began weeks earlier, with a body found in a frozen drainage canal outside a quiet Massachusetts suburb. The woman had no ID, no phone, no purse. Only a hospital wristband still clinging to her arm, half torn, smeared with mud. The name printed on it didn't match any missing person report. It took 2 days to identify her. When they did, the detectives went silent. Her name was Laura Benton, and according to state records, she had died 31 years ago. Emily Rourke first heard the name Laura Benton in a phone call she almost ignored. It came late at night, the number unfamiliar. When she answered, the voice on the other end was calm, practiced, and unsettlingly precise. The caller introduced himself as Detective Harris and asked Emily a question that knocked the breath from her lungs. "Do you know a woman named Laura Benton?" Emily said no. She was sure of it. But when the detective mentioned the year, 1991, something cold slid down her spine. That was the year Emily was born. The next morning, Emily drove to her parents' house unannounced. The place looked the same as always: white siding, neatly trimmed hedges, a porch swing that creaked with familiarity. Inside, Margaret Rourke fussed over coffee, while Thomas read the paper. They smiled when they saw her. Too quickly. Emily asked about the hospital where she'd been born. Then she asked about the doctor. Then she asked about complications. Her parents exchanged glances that were barely there, but Emily saw them. She pressed harder. When she mentioned the name Laura Benton, the room went quiet in a way that felt rehearsed. Margaret dropped the coffee mug. It shattered across the kitchen floor. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She dug through boxes in her childhood bedroom, old report cards, birthday cards, keepsakes. At the bottom of a box labeled "baby stuff," she found something she'd never seen before: a folded hospital discharge paper with a corner torn off. The name Laura Benton appeared faintly in the margin, crossed out in pen. The next day, Emily met with the detective. He told her what they knew. Laura Benton had been admitted to the same hospital on the same night Emily was born. There was a complication, a medical error, records altered, a sealed internal investigation that went nowhere. Laura had vanished from public life shortly after. No death certificate, no relocation records, nothing. Until now. As the investigation unfolded, journalists began circling Emily. They dug into her background, her education, her mental health history. They dug into her parents' finances, their sudden move 2 years after her birth, the quiet settlement they received from the hospital, marked simply as miscellaneous damages. Then Emily's attorneys filed the lawsuit. They alleged that Thomas and Margaret Rourke had known the truth all along, that Emily was born as the result of negligence, deceit, and a decision made in a hospital room that destroyed another woman's life, that her parents had chosen silence, money, and comfort over truth. In court filings, Emily described years of depression, identity confusion, and unexplained medical issues. She claimed her entire existence was built on a lie carefully maintained by the two people she trusted most. But it was one document, unsealed by a judge just days before the first hearing, that changed everything. A handwritten note from a hospital administrator, dated the night Emily was born, ending with 7 words that turned the case into a nightmare. Child reassigned. Mother unaware. Parents informed. And suddenly, the question wasn't just why Emily was suing her parents. It was who she was supposed to be and where the real child had gone. The courtroom felt smaller once the note became public. What had been a curiosity turned into something radioactive. Every seat was filled, every whisper amplified. The Rourkes sat on opposite sides now. Emily at the plaintiff's table, Thomas and Margaret at the defense. No longer a family, but opposing forces in a legal war that had begun decades too late. Detective Harris took the stand first. He laid out the timeline with surgical calm. 2 women admitted to the maternity ward within minutes of each other. 1 uncomplicated birth. 1 emergency. A flurry of nurses, a panicked resident, a doctor who would later claim exhaustion. Somewhere in that chaos, a decision was made. Not a mistake corrected. A choice enforced. Hospital logs showed a gap, 37 minutes with no recorded activity. No vitals. No signatures. Just a blank stretch of time that swallowed the truth. Emily's attorneys introduced Laura Benton's history, reconstructed from fragments. She was 23, single, and struggling. A waitress saving for night classes. Her pregnancy had been unplanned, her support system thin. But there was nothing in her records to suggest she relinquished a child. No adoption papers. No consent. No signature. The last documented interaction Laura had with the hospital was a discharge note stamped stable. After that, she disappeared. When the medical examiner testified about the body found in the canal, the courtroom held its breath. Laura had been living under an alias. She'd moved often, left no digital trail, worked cash jobs. She carried with her a single object until the end, a faded ultrasound photo folded until the edges frayed. On the back, in shaky ink, a name was written and crossed out. Emily. Margaret Rourke's testimony was scheduled for the afternoon. By then, the air was electric. Cameras waited outside like predators. Inside, Margaret looked smaller than Emily remembered, shoulders hunched, hands clasped too tightly. When asked if she recognized Laura Benton's name, she hesitated. Yes, she said finally. The admission rippled through the room. Margaret claimed she'd been told there was a mix-up, that the hospital assured her it would be corrected, that when they offered a settlement, it was framed as compensation for emotional distress. She said she believed the other mother had agreed. She said she never asked questions because she was terrified of losing Emily. Emily listened, stone still. Thomas took the stand next. His version was sharper, colder. He admitted the hospital told them the child they were given wasn't biologically theirs, but said the alternative was unthinkable. The other baby, he claimed, had died. That's what they were told. That's what justified everything. But then Emily's attorney introduced a document Thomas had never mentioned, a non-disclosure agreement signed 2 weeks after Emily's birth. It included a clause stating the biological mother was alive and unconsenting. Thomas's face drained of color. The prosecution pressed. Had he known Laura Benton was alive? Had he known she was searching? Had he ever considered telling Emily? Thomas didn't answer. Outside the courtroom, the pressure mounted. Protesters gathered, some accusing Emily of ingratitude, others demanding accountability for the hospital. Social media erupted with theories. Had Emily been stolen? Was Laura Benton the real victim? And where was the other child? The one Laura had carried. That question gnawed at Emily. She began her own search, poring over records, chasing rumors. A name surfaced, then another. A child placed in foster care under unusual circumstances months after Emily's birth. Records sealed. Files missing. Emily hired a private investigator. 3 days later, he called with urgency in his voice. He'd found a woman in Vermont who matched the timeline. Same hospital, same night, same nurse listed on the intake form. The woman had grown up in foster care, bounced between homes, diagnosed with attachment disorders. She had no birth certificate, only a delayed registration issued years later. Her name was Claire. Emily drove north in a storm, heart pounding. She sat across from Claire in a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and wet coats. Claire's eyes were familiar in a way that hurt. When Emily explained why she was there, Claire laughed once, sharp and hollow. They told me my mother didn't want me, Claire said. That she vanished. Emily pulled out the ultrasound photo. Claire's breath caught. Before they could speak again, a man entered the diner and froze when he saw them. He turned and left quickly, too quickly. That night, Emily received a message from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some births were never meant to be corrected. Attached was a photo, grainy, taken from a distance, of Claire standing outside her apartment. And beneath it, a final line that made Emily's blood run cold. The hospital wasn't the only one who knew. The courtroom was packed again, but this time the tension was unbearable. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, Claire at her side, an unspoken connection bridging the years they had lost. Cameras flashed continuously, journalists scribbled furiously, and the judge entered, his presence commanding silence. This was the final hearing, the culmination of decades of secrecy, lies, and lost lives. The prosecution opened with a timeline of deception. Every missing document, every altered record, every sealed note was presented with meticulous precision. Emily's attorneys laid out a sequence of events that left the defense scrambling. 2 newborns switched, the biological mother silenced. The Rourkes complicit in maintaining the lie, and Emily raised under assumptions that were carefully constructed by those who should have been her protectors. Margaret Rourke testified again, this time with her hands shaking. She admitted that she had indeed known Laura Benton had survived and that the child had been placed elsewhere. She claimed she was following instructions from the hospital, but her voice wavered when asked why she never told Emily the truth. I thought it was protecting her, Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. I thought keeping her safe meant keeping her from knowing. Thomas Rourke, in contrast, refused to meet Emily's eyes. He insisted he acted in good faith, that the hospital bore the blame entirely, and that he had only wanted to provide Emily with a stable life. But his calm demeanor began to crumble when the private investigator's report was introduced. Photographs, documents, and records proving that he had been notified multiple times that Laura Benton's child was alive and still unaccounted for. The prosecution paused, letting the weight of evidence settle in the room. Emily felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about truth, about reclaiming a life that had been stolen before she could even know she had won. Claire was called to testify. Her voice was steady, but the courtroom could feel the tremor beneath it. She described her own upbringing in foster care, the confusion, the longing for answers, and the years of being told that her mother had abandoned her. She described the moment she discovered Emily and how it shattered everything she thought she knew. "There's a part of me that always wondered if I even existed for anyone," Claire said, her eyes locked on the judge. "And now, at least, I know I wasn't forgotten entirely." Emily's attorneys then presented the most damning piece of evidence. Internal hospital memos showing deliberate concealment of the birth records, a chain of approvals signed by administrators who had knowingly facilitated the switch and silenced both families. The memos painted a picture of greed, bureaucratic arrogance, and institutional indifference. When the defense attempted to counter, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. The evidence was too clear, the timeline too precise. Emily could feel the tide shifting in real time. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. He recited the facts slowly, deliberately, emphasizing the impact of the hospital's actions and the choices made by the Rourkes in hiding the truth. The court finds that Emily Rourke's life has been materially and emotionally harmed by the actions and inactions of the defendants, he said. The hospital bears ultimate responsibility, but the complicity of the Rourkes cannot be ignored. Damages are awarded accordingly. Emily felt her knees weaken. Relief, anger, and sorrow collided inside her. The court had recognized the stolen decades, the emotional manipulation, and the suffering inflicted. Claire reached out, grasping her hand tightly. No words were needed. The bond forged in stolen infancy was now solidified in truth. But as the courtroom emptied and reporters scrambled for statements, a final twist emerged. A letter, and signed, was slid under Emily's chair by a bailiff. The handwriting was familiar, yet unnerving. It read simply, "This is not over. Someone else knows. Be careful who you trust." Emily stared at the note, her heart pounding. The legal battle had concluded, but the story was far from over. The hospital had been exposed. The Rourkes had been held accountable. But the shadow of that night, decades ago, and the unknown parties who had covered it up, still lingered. She looked at Claire. "We finally have answers," she said. "But I don't think anyone can ever feel safe again knowing how close the truth was to being buried." Claire nodded silently, holding the folded ultrasound photo that had connected their lives. Outside the courthouse, the wind whipped the autumn leaves like restless spirits. Cameras clicked, questions shouted, but Emily and Claire walked together, each step reclaiming a lifetime stolen from them. And in the back of her mind, Emily knew one thing. Justice had been served, but some mysteries, some human betrayals, never truly ended. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.